Running backs might not matter, but that's going to change after this year because this is one of the most loaded running back classes in NFL history, completely changing the running back landscape as we know it. I'm Dave Kluge, as always, joined with Jeff Bell. Today, we are going to compare our rankings, put them together, and then look at where natural tier breaks happen here. And Jeff, go ahead and start us off. I think the top three in tier number one should come as no surprise to anybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do want to say you start the show off saying running backs don't matter, but I think that we saw a little bit of a shift this past year back towards bell cow usage. I think you've seen opportunities away from that committee approach where quarterbacks can keep the ball in RPO actions or wide receivers can get involved in the run game and just schemed up touches, those types of things have pushed
A
running
bit
backs.
tongue in cheek.
Yeah, well,
just a little bit, yeah. Running backs
well,
do
geez,
matter.
deflate me like before we get started, Dave. But no, we're good. No, I think top three pretty clear right now. Bijan Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs, and Ashton Genty are our top three running backs, and I think that you're probably going to find that pretty consensus across the industry.
Yeah, I talked about this. I just recently wrote a article on running back tiers and rankings, and I talk about these three. I mean, we don't see something like this often, where we have three guys who all drafted inside the top 12 of the NFL draft, all are under the age of 23. I think that common sense would tell you that when, I have always for years, like whoever the top running back is in Dynasty, I'm trying to move off of that player for safer assets. But you look at all of these guys, they're all on pretty good offenses with pretty good offensive lines. They're all unbelievable talents. They're all very young, like I said, 23 or younger. I think this is one of those where you actually do want to hold on to these guys, unless you're getting a Jamar Chase or a Justin Jefferson, Malik Neighbors, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Jaden Daniels in return. I think that's kind of the list for me. Maybe you could sneak Brock Bowers in there, but I think these guys are top 10, top 15 overall in dynasty values.
I absolutely agree. And I do think one point is interesting because we've seen Ashton Genty as the consensus 101 in rookie drafts. But I've also seen a lot of people say, well, I'm a rebuilder. I have the 101. I don't want to have a running back on my roster. And I push back on that hard. That I think that you need to look at and be realistic about this because I've run polls before where people kind of say, like I remember asking a question of how many top 60 players do you think you need on your dynasty roster to not be a rebuilder anymore? And the consensus answers were like 7 or 8 players. And if you do the math, like that's pretty insane that if you're looking at a 12 team league and you think
like
you need to get 8
3 or
top
4.
60 guys to not be contending, you're exactly right. 3 or 4. I look at it as kind of half your starting lineup. If you've got 5 or 6 guys in a 10 team league, I mean, you need to be going for it because those players are high value players. And I push back hard on rebuilders just flipping that 101 that they've got Ashton Genty there because I think that that's should be viewed as a cornerstone piece that if you've already got 2 strong quarterback options in Superflex, if you've got a couple high-end wide receiver or 2, and then you can add Ashton Genty into that lineup, then you're going. Like you're not continuing to re-roll that. Like you're ready to go. And so I think that the way we've seen this shift, and I started to talk about it a little bit, but I do think a lot of it has kind of spun out of there was the story in 2023 about Kyren Williams usage and about how the Rams like to keep Kyren Williams in the game for all situations because it kind of tricked defenses up a little bit. And then you saw the next year, a lot more teams did that. A lot of teams stepped away, and you saw obviously the Eagles add Saquon Barkley and Josh Jacobs go to the Packers. Those types of moves that offenses or franchises that would not have traditionally valued the position made that move. And I think that even the 49ers adding Christian McCaffrey was part of that as well, of that revolution towards that direction. Thank God that Saquon Barkley won the Super Bowl because had he not, then running backs would have been completely devalued across the league because the Chiefs would have won it with people off the street, essentially. So that does mean running backs are important because Saquon Barkley did single-handedly win that Super Bowl.
A little bit more tongue-in-cheek for those that didn't catch on. I don't think we need to spend too much more time here. The one thing I'd say, if you are sitting at 101 and you are a true contender, I mean, like no blue chip prospects on your team whatsoever, I still do think it's good process to trade back, if you can still land inside the top 5, get additional first round picks on top of it. But like you said, for so many teams, drafting Ashton Genty is the difference between being a rebuilder and a contender. Like you might be a rebuilder now, but you put Ashton Genty, if he's giving you 23, 25 points per game, then all of a sudden you are a contender. So sometimes that alone keeping that 101 could make the switch for you. Jeff, let's move on to tier number 2. And this is a small tier with two very different players on there, Saquon Barkley and Omarion Hampton. Now, peek behind the curtain. When I am breaking up these tiers, what I look at is our average rankings, and I just try to see where there are naturally big gaps between the next tier. And for us, we were pretty close when it comes to an aggregate on these players. They average out to 4.5 and 5.5, but the disparities are a little bit different. Jeff, you're a little bit higher on Omarion Hampton. I'm a little bit higher on Saquon Barkley, but I think it's pretty obvious here that if you are a contender, you want to go after Saquon Barkley. And if you are a rebuilder or maybe even just a middle of the pack sort of team, it probably makes more sense to add a guy like Omarion Hampton.
And I would say in all circumstances, I would rather add Omarion Hampton than Saquon Barkley to my Dynasty roster, just the way that I want to play Dynasty. But I think it's, for me, I mean, you're talking about a player that's 6 years younger, that certainly it's very difficult to match the current upside of Saquon Barkley. And you talk about Ashton Genty being a piece by himself that could push you to contender status. I mean, Saquon Barkley is the definition of that type of piece right now. But we talked a little bit pre-show, and you were kind of on it pretty well last year, talking about Christian McCaffrey, that if something were to go wrong on Christian McCaffrey, and we got something that went very wrong, you're going to lose dynasty value that you're never going to recover off of Saquon Barkley at this age. And so that's where I think it's a very fine needle. And that's where I am going to defer to, especially a running back with first round draft capital that we feel should be in a very high end offense, assuming that he can clear the Najee Harris hurdle in the room with him. You would think that Hampton would be at a similar place as Saquon Barkley, maybe. That's really hard to be, but somewhere in that range in the next year or two.
So I think I'm glad you said that in the next year or two. And I think that's my fear, is that if you are a contender and you're holding on to Omarion Hampton, I'm a little bit concerned for his rookie season outlook, and maybe I am just overthinking this. I mean, yeah, he's a first round talent on a great offense. Maybe it just is that simple. But I see Najee Harris there. I see Gus Edwards there. And then I flash back
Gus
to
Edwards
J.K.
is not there,
Dobbins.
Dave. We've talked about this before.
Oh, sorry, not Gus Edwards. J.K. Dobbins. J.K. Dobbins is on that weird tag where they are probably going to bring him back. I was doing some research yesterday. It seemed more likely than not that J.K. Dobbins is going to be a Charger. And then, of course, Najee Harris is in the picture as well. Omarion Hampton, obviously a first-round talent, a little bit different, but the closest comp I could find for bringing in a highly drafted running back into a system like this, when the Ravens drafted J.K. Dobbins never really took over as the lead back. About halfway through the season, when Mark Ingram got injured his rookie season, he saw his work uptick a little bit, but he was consistently staying in that 50 to 55% snap share, seeing about 45% of the opportunities. Do you think that that could be the case now with Omarion Hampton, that maybe Najee Harris is a little bit more involved, and that for year one, we're looking at kind of a 40, 50, 55% snap share for Omarion Hampton? Or do you think that he's a good enough player that he's just going to be able to clear that and just take over the backfield entirely?
Najee Harris is going to be more involved than anybody wants him to be involved. And that's just the bottom line. He is going to be involved. He is not a horrible player. He's actually a pretty good football player. And he is going to be, it's going to be one of those that we're going to be the stream of tweet barrages when Najee Harris has 75 yards in week one with a touchdown and Omarion Hampton has, 65 and hasn't scored yet, of people just angry about that situation. We know it's coming. I think that I completely agree with you, and I think your breakdown is right. It's going to be a coaching situation where they trust Najee Harris to be that veteran. We just see it time and time again. We
Right.
occasionally see, even look at last year with the Buccaneers, where we knew Rachaad White there was questions and concerns about his efficiency, and then you see Bucky Irving come in and he's a bolt of lightning, and it took until about like week 15 or so before the playoff-bound Buccaneers finally said, all right, we just need to give Bucky them as the main guy and move Rachaad White kind of into a backseat. It's just the way, the nature that NFL coaches are going to operate.
Let's move on to the next tier, because I don't think we have a whole lot more to say about this one. And this next tier, like I said, this is a very different running back landscape than I think we've seen in years past. Here we are getting to the, what is this, 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th player. And these are still very, very good prospects that you want to go out and try to get on your dynasty teams. In tier 3, we've got Devon Achane, Breece Hall, Jonathan Taylor, and Travion Henderson. Jeff, we can talk about all of these guys. We don't have any huge disparities here except for Travion Henderson. I've got him as an RB15, so kind of at that RB1, RB2 cusp. You are really holding down for Travion Henderson. You've got him as your RB5. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Well, first off, I do think we should expand this tier to include Bucky Irving into this tier. Otherwise, we're going to be auto canceled by everybody that's listening to this. So I think that given the market, you probably have to mention Bucky Irving in this tier as well. But talk about Travion Henderson, and I think that it's basically. I kind of think there are maybe two mindsets when you have a player like Travion Henderson, and I'm of the mindset of I believe in the talent. I think he's landed in a great situation. My expectation is that he kind of takes over that backfield, and you might say, well, Ramondre Stevenson, you just talked about Najee Harris. Is Ramondre Stevenson worse than Najee Harris?
I think
I don't
so.
know. But, well, I think the Patriots think so. At least last year's coaching staff thought so. But no, I think that you're either going to buy into the talent and you're going to buy into the situation and you're going to be ahead of the market, or you're going to be of the belief that I want to see it first. And I
Mhm.
think that if you're the type that you want to see it first, you're probably going to miss on a lot in Dynasty, because I think that you're going to have a lot of people that split the two, that you're going to have people like myself that I'm just going to draft the youth. I'm going to build my roster around the youth. I'm going to be patient and believe that it's going to happen. And if I get a couple years down the road and it hasn't happened yet, okay, then I'll take what I can get at that point. Or you're going to be of the belief that I'm going to defer to until I see Travion Henderson really pop, until I see him start to take over the backfield. And if that's the case, then I think, especially in a startup environment, you're just not going to have very much Travion Henderson on your roster.
I agree with that. I think so. When you're in a draft, are you drafting strictly off of these rankings? Because if so, I'd assume that you're taking Travion Henderson probably back end of round 2. Does that sound about right to you in a startup?
In a startup, well, I mean, I'm really kicking the can down the road on running backs
Yeah.
usually in a startup. I mean, the startup that we're in currently was a different situation. I got Omar in Hampton in the 6th round of a 10-team startup. So, and that felt like, okay, he's my running back 4. I'll take him
Yeah.
here. I'm happy to do that. But kicking the can down the road, part of it on running backs. And so even though I value Travion Henderson high relative to running backs, I just don't value running backs high generally as a whole in a startup environment. I'm going to defer to the quarterbacks. I'm going to defer to the younger wide receivers and try to build my roster around those types of players. And so, if I am in a room with people like yourself that also likes to have good quarterbacks and good young wide receivers, and you're valuing Travion Henderson at running back
Opens up a
15,
window.
then I'm going to open up a window and get a nice little value and have Travion Henderson on my roster. But where I really come down to it is like the players like Jonathan Taylor. Like, those are the players that I really struggle probably to roster in a startup environment, just because
Yeah.
I I
You're
believe
basically drafting a depreciating asset. I mean, there's
you
no
are.
room for Jonathan Taylor to grow at this point. You know you're gonna get production, but where he's at right now in dynasty rankings, there's so little room for him to climb.
Yes, and I walk into every startup really with the productive struggle, like, quote unquote, is kind of the mindset on that. But I'm fine being bad year one, just because I want to draft a young roster that is going to gain value over the season, that might not win me games, but I also recognize that if I add the 101, the 102
Right.
onto that young roster, that's a player that's going would have been an extra first round pick in a startup, versus I'll play in leagues with people that they are a little bit more aggressive on the veteran running backs. So they do win year one, but then I just feel like you're running into a situation where you've already depreciated your roster. Yeah, you got a flags fly forever, and that's awesome, especially in a pay league that maybe you've paid for the next decade of being in that league. But at the same time, all your running backs are old now. You add the 112, and you're going against teams like myself that are a little bit more patient, forward thinking, and in year 3, 4, I got you pretty good.
Yeah, my dog agrees with you. I'm sure you can hear her barking out in the distance right now. But I did take that approach in a startup 2 years ago, where I was drafting with a bunch of sharp guys, and they just kept letting these veteran running backs fall. I said, "This is awesome," and I picked up Derrick Henry and David Montgomery and Joe Mixon and all of these guys, and I didn't win a championship. And now here we are 2 years out from the startup draft, and I have all of these old running backs. My team kind of stinks. I don't have the banner to fly and any sort. So now I'm just kind of stuck in no man's land, where I have these aging running backs that nobody wants. I didn't get the championship, so wanted to try it because it was a new strategy that I hadn't used before, but would not recommend that one. One other guy I want to talk about. We can talk about all these guys real quickly, but Devon Achan. He has been a mover for me. I was notably pretty low on Devon Achan last year, but I like now that we've seen two very different seasons from him. His rookie year, the volume wasn't there, but he was just breakaway runs, efficiency through the roof. And that kind of concerned me a little bit going into year two. But then in year two, we saw vastly different usage. And we saw, well, this guy can also get it done as a primary receiving weapon. So now we know he's got the efficiency as a rusher. We also know he's got the ability to shoulder a huge workload as a receiver. So now there's multiple outs for elite fantasy production for Devon Achane. That's why I bumped him up in the rankings a little bit. Jeff, we're not really concerned about the draft capital or the size or any of those things at this point, right?
No, he's shown himself to be a difference making player, and that's the biggest thing that we're betting on right now. A big thing that I'm with running backs, especially young running backs, splash plays are huge, and Devon Achane is the definition of a splash play. I'm knee deep in the Dolphins kind of the last couple of years because I'm working through their projections right now, and Tua Tagovailoa's pocket time has just disintegrated. It was 2.1. It was the lowest
Oh,
in the
that
league,
offensive line was
and
so bad last year.
that offensive line was so bad. They
They
weren't
got rid of
attacking
all of their good offensive linemen and thought that they would
that
just be able to keep it rolling for some reason.
well. But interestingly, it was also 2.1 the year before, and it was 2. I think it was about 2.5, 2.6 the year 2022 when they
They still
really
had
brought
Robert
in
Hunt and
Tyreek
Ron
Hill and
Armstead
kind
and
of
his
really
yeah.
things like exploded in that offense in 2022. 2023, it felt like they got figured out a little bit midway through the season. That Chiefs game in Germany feels like a key breaking point there. 2024, it's kind of get the ball out of your hands, and that's where we've seen Devon Achane and we've seen Jonnu Smith step into that offense because the ADOTs of the receivers have dropped off the cliff as well. But I say that to mean that I think that the passing component of Devon Achane is very, very much there. I'm curious about the running component because I think that
Yeah.
there's two different mindsets on we want that nice clean 2023 season where Raheem Mostert was also a top 10 running back and there were two running backs, and you see them adding Jalen Wright, you see them adding Ollie Gordon, and I think naturally you think in your mind it's going to be one or the other. But I think that had Jeff Wilson stayed a little bit healthier, I think they might have had a little bit more of a three-headed approach. And I think that they might have a little bit more of a three-headed approach in the run game when it comes to those two being involved. And so I think the run game aspect for Devon Achane can maybe get pretty messy because I think there's two different paths. Either there's a three-headed backfield that everybody's kind of getting rushing attempts, but he's also getting the targets, or
Right.
he is kind of that primary back. They've got two different change of pace backs, but he's also involved in the passing game. And so that there's a split, I think, on where Achane could end up.
And that's why I think, I think that he has insulated his value a little bit with the two different seasons because we know if the rushing is there, he can be an elite and efficient runner. And if the rushing isn't there, we know that he can make up for it as a very productive receiver. So what that tells me is that regardless of the backfield competition, if they bring in a really good pass catcher, well, he can still make his living as a runner. And if they bring in a really good runner, let's say Ollie Gordon takes that step forward and takes over all of the early down and goal line work, well, you still shouldn't be that concerned for Devon Achane because he's still going to get his work through the air. So that's what I like about him, is just that there are multiple outs to relevance. Last guy I want to talk about in this tier real quickly, Jeff, is Breece Hall. Turns 24 years old in about a week and a half. So still younger than I think a lot of people think. Got to remember he got drafted coming in the league really young. Then he had that ACL tear. Feels like he's been around for a long time, but still very much so on the right side of the age curve. We don't have a huge disparity here, Jeff. I've got him as the RB6. You've got him as the RB8. Let me just ask you strictly about his 2025 outlook. Do you think that playing with Justin Fields is going to negatively impact his ability to score fantasy points?
I maybe yes in the passing game, just because I think, and especially when you look at 2023, the way he ended that year, so much of it was in the passing game, and I don't know that that's going to be there. My
Can I point out
primary concern.
real quickly? I just did a little data dig on this, and I was shocked. If you look at Justin Fields during his tenure in Chicago, he checked down at the lowest rate of any quarterback. And then last year in Pittsburgh, he checked down at the third highest rate. So I don't know if that was just Tomlin in his ear saying, like, hey, stop running so much and get the ball to your check down option in Najee Harris or Jalen Warren, or I don't know what happened, but I do want to point out that there was a drastic change in Justin Fields' willingness to check down last year, and hopefully that can bleed over into this season. So just wanted to throw that out there because that was a very surprising nugget that I pulled up.
Yeah, and I mean it does come down to Fields, and Fields right now I think is a big mystery box in terms
Mhm,
of because I think last year probably in Pittsburgh they were pushing him more to become a traditional NFL type of a quarterback, and I'm really curious because I don't know where Aaron Glenn, where the new offensive coordinator will approach this if they will kind of lean into, hey, you're Justin Fields, you're a dynamic athlete, let's make it so that you can be a dynamic athlete and be a problem on the field, or if they're going to say, we want you to be our long-term quarterback, and this is what an NFL long-term quarterback looks like. So do these things. I think we've seen enough talk about it, and there was a lot of I kind of tongue in cheek poked out last year about Braylon Allen being involved and it being more of a committee backfield, whereas people were taking Brees Hall like top 5 in their draft, or thinking some people were taking him at the 101 even, and thinking that he's going to be this elite guy. And I got a lot of pushback that the Jets might have had a committee with Braylon Allen
mhm.
throughout the season, and I think
And
that
Isaiah
we've seen
Davis.
and Isaiah Davis. They've
Yes.
mentioned that they have got 3 running backs that they like.
And if
And
you
so
look at the
that's where,
efficiency, you could argue that Isaiah Davis had a better season last year than Braylon Allen did.
well, what do we say about efficiency and Jalen Warren getting a lot of yards on third down and long draws?
True,
But
but the
that's
touch
neither here nor
total
there. But
between Braylon Allen and Isaiah Davis wasn't that wide either. I mean, it's not like Isaiah Davis was just coming in for cleanup.
he's a good player.
He was, yeah, and there was a split last year.
Yeah, so I think there's 2 different mindsets on I think the way I envision the Jets offense is being RPO heavy, allowing Fields to run, rotating all 3 running backs, having those players involved, having 2 on the field, maybe sometimes at the same time, doing a lot of actions off of that, misdirection, those types of things that leans heavily into the run game, with Garrett Wilson being hyper targeted in the receiving game and everybody else kind of just being there in the receiving game, is where I think that we'll see this offense end up. And that could be very good for Brees Hall, or that could be pretty cloudy for Brees Hall.
Well, let's move on to the next tier here, and we wanna dissect these early tiers a little bit more than some of the other ones. We'll start moving quicker through the
Yeah.
players as we get further down the list. But tier 4 here, we have a nice blend of veterans and young day 3 players and good prospects to bet on. In tier 4, we've got Bucky Irving, Chase Brown, Quinshon Judkins, Chris McCaffrey, Josh Jacobs, Kyron Williams, and Ken Walker the third. Jeff, you said that we would need to mention Bucky Irving, or we would get in trouble by some of the listeners here. Um, let's talk a little bit about that, because Bucky Irving, mind blowing efficiency his rookie season, and he really took over the backfield over the back half of the season here. But day 3 draft capital worries some people. Liam Cohen now out of the picture worries some people as well. This feels about right, though, as kind of a back end RB1. I don't want to move him up any higher than this, but this feels about right to me. And I want to say you and I are in lockstep on this one. We have him both at the same exact spot, ranked as RB11.
We have the same ranks, but I'm tier 4 under protest. I think he's tier 3, so I want that to be noted for our loyal listeners. But his keep trade cut value is running back 7, and I do think that keep trade cut leans into maybe a crowd that would value Bucky Irving a little bit more at run 7, at running back 7, instead of some of the things that you mentioned that are very real concerns. And so I mean that's probably worth mentioning there. I mean, you saw him, the way he took over, the way he ran
Yeah.
so hot, but I think that, I mean, Liam Cohen's a big component of that, and they had Dave Canales the year before, so they've plugged in another guy immediately in Liam Cohen, and maybe
Right.
they've done the same this offseason. So you have to like, kind of leave that in play.
Well, they
We've
did
also
promote
seen,
from within, which tells me
yeah,
that the system probably is going to change too much. Josh Grizzard is the guy I believe that they brought up, and I'd imagine that they keep a similar offensive philosophy.
I think it's worth noting to you think about Devon Achan in his rookie year, how he was so explosive, but he was also like in a very somewhat limited role,
Right.
and that allowed him to be explosive. And Bucky Irving's coming in being very explosive, having a lot of his work limited throughout the season, and then kind of hitting that back quarter of the season when you either got teams that have given up, you've got veterans that have tired legs, and you coming in with like just a shot of adrenaline with fresh legs over that last stretch can be a pretty big deal. And I think we've seen, then you talk about Devon Chan the next year, where he was more involved from day one and got more usage, and the efficiency fell out a little bit. And so that's where, if the efficiency falls out on Bucky Irving because he's getting more work early in the season, there's a push-pull of like, well, the running back's getting more work. That's good. But also he's not
Right.
having the big explosive plays anymore. That's bad. And so I think that's where I leave Bucky Irving in play, that it's going to be an adjustment period probably for him.
So before we talk about the next guy, Chase Brown, I want to ask you a question real quick. I kind of have this rule. I think that you need to have strict rules that help, keep you disciplined when you're playing in Dynasty. And one of those rules that I have is that I have a running back who is drafted on day 3, and they get to a point where I can flip them for a first round rookie pick. I don't care who it is. I don't care how exciting the profile is, whether it's Devon Achane, Bucky Irving, Chase Brown, Damian Pierce, or Jordan Howard. If I can take a day 3 running back and flip him for a first round pick, I'm doing that 100% of the time. And right now, when we're looking at Bucky Irving and the next guy we're going to talk about, Chase Brown, both of these guys you can get first round rookie picks for. Do you think that these guys could potentially defy that? Or do you think that I should stick to my process and continue trying to trade these guys for premium rookie draft picks?
The reason why you have a process is because you expect it's going to win over time. And I think
Right.
that you're right that you keep doing that move, wins over time. We've just seen it. It works out very well. Had you moved Isaiah Pacheco last summer, you'd be feeling pretty good about relative to where you're sitting right now. It wins over time, and that's why you develop a process and a rule. So I would say that certainly, yes, they could buck that, and you could be kicking yourself that you've traded a top 5 running back for the next
And
couple
I
of
did
years.
with
And
Kyron Williams. I traded away a lot of
exactly.
Kyron Williams shares, and I was kicking myself for it, but man's got to have a process.
Exactly. And I know, like, we were in a league together. I had Kyron Williams. You had more of a win now roster. I got Devonta Smith for Kyron Williams
Yep.
in that league. And I'm happy to do that because I was shifting towards the younger, especially at the time, wide receiver. And so, yeah, that's process. And so that's where I think your process is right, will win over time. But Kyron Williams is an example of where, sometimes it doesn't exactly win over time. And maybe you gave up a little bit of value, but that's Dynasty in a nutshell, that you develop and build rules out for yourself and things that you believe over time. And you kind of have to let the one off go in those types of situations.
I actually did a quick study yesterday. And I don't want to get too off the rails here, but I was looking at day 3 wide receivers to day 3 running backs. And I'm going to deepen this study a little bit throughout this week. I've got some free time tomorrow that I'm really going to peel back the layers here. But I just wanted to look at players who were drafted on day 3, finishing top 12 in their position. And over the last 10 years, when it comes to wide receivers, we have seen 4 guys do this. And those guys are Amon St. Brown, Puka Nacua, Tyreek Hill, and Hunter Renfrow. So if you hear those names, 3 of those guys, Amon St. Brown, Puka Nacua, and Tyreek Hill, are giving you insulated value, prolonged productivity. There's only really one flash in the pan there, and that's Hunter Renfrow, a guy who barely snuck in as a top 12 wide receiver and then kind of fell off the face of the earth the next year. Running backs, however, if you look over the last 10 years, and I'm lumping in undrafted players as well. So you've got Austin Eckler, Phillip Lindsay, and James Robinson as the undrafted guys. For the running backs drafted on day 3 who finished as top 12 running backs, Kyron Williams, Chase Brown, Raheem Mostert, Jamal Williams, Aaron Jones, Ramondre Stevenson, Chris Carson, James White, and Jordan Howard. So you hear that is a much more exhaustive list. There are a lot more guys that have been able to do it, but almost all of those guys had one RB1 season and then never did it again. The only guys that we've seen multiple seasons come from out of that bunch are Kyron Williams and Aaron Jones. So that just strengthens my belief that you should try to flip these guys, because the reality that you're drafting a guy who was drafted on day 3, that you're drafting a running back that's going to give you 4, 5, 6 years of RB1 production is almost non-existent. So you're going to get this one season where they kind of boom, and then it's just good process to move off of those guys after.
Yeah, and I think you're arguing apples and oranges if you're looking at day 3 for the 2 positions, just because wide receiver is so valued heavily that any wide receiver with first round ish caliber capital is going to go in the first round because the position's so important and so valuable.
Right.
Whereas half the teams in the league aren't even looking at a running back before day 3, and so you're kind of dealing with 2 different samples. And the running back can be a lot more situational and step in there. Whereas like you look at Hunter Renfrow, the Raiders probably had that Hunter Renfrow season and said, oh man, we need to go get Devontae Adams and we need to go get Brock Bowers
Right.
because Hunter Renfrow cannot be our leading receiver. Whereas like
Yep.
kind of some of the running back stuff, it can be, falls the way for that running back to have that great season because everybody else falls out or whatever else happens there.
So for the rest of the guys in this tier, Quinshot Judkins, you're a little bit higher on him. I understand why you like to bet on the youth, especially in startups, as we talked about a little bit earlier, which would also explain these next two players, Christian McCaffrey and Josh Jacobs, two players that I am a little bit higher on, and you are a little bit lower on. And then rounding out this tier, Kyron Williams, you and I are pretty much in lockstep, having him as RB13 and RB14. But let's talk about McCaffrey for a little bit. I still have him inside the top 10. We're hearing word out of San Francisco that he's healthy now. And for me, it just comes down to that. Even if you're getting one season from Christian McCaffrey, where he is the Christian McCaffrey of old, I think that justifies a top 10 dynasty value there because a lot of the guys that I have ranked below Christian McCaffrey are never even going to sniff that sort of potential. But obviously, the age is there. The injuries are starting to pile up. You don't typically see a running back at his age buck the injury bug. So I understand why you're a little bit lower on him. Is there anything you want to say specifically, though, about Christian McCaffrey or Josh Jacobs?
Just maybe process in general, but when I'm doing dynasty ranks, I value heavily where I'm going to take a player in a startup. And so when I'm ranking running backs, I look at it where I'm going to take a guy in a startup because I think that that's the cleanest, most sterile environment to be able to rank something off of. And dynasty rankings probably should be more dynamic. We operate within the bounds of what we have, because you talk about contender status, those types of things should maybe be a factor. But again, I tend to lean towards more towards just youth in general. I think that it's I always joke or when we ever see the trade questions and people will say, well, people will ask, are you a contender, are you a rebuilder, what are you doing here? And my response is always, well, I'm playing dynasty because I'm just trying to get more value in the future. But I think it's just instrumental on the way that I build ranks, whereas like my redraft ranks are, it's more art versus science. I lean into projections heavily on my redraft ranks and I let the numbers talk for themselves. Whereas in dynasty, I'm viewing it as a sterile startup environment. And so because of that, I'm just going to value running backs, veteran running backs lower in my ranks, probably relative to consensus.
That's fair. And that's why I think it really is so hard to have like a flat list of dynasty rankings. And that's why I really enjoy this series that I'm working on right now. I came out with running backs last week, wide receivers this week, where I put players in buckets with players who have similar archetypes, similar scoring profiles, similar draft capital, similar age. And then by bucketing those players together, I rank them within those buckets. And I basically say, if you are a pure contender, maybe look for some of these guys: Derrick Henry, Christian McCaffrey, Joe Mixon, Alvin Kamara, James Conner, Aaron Jones, these aging guys that you can probably pry away from a manager for close to nothing. Maybe you're getting nothing in return. Maybe you're getting an RB1 season or two. And then I have the other guys that, hey, if you're just completely out of the picture and you have no chance of contending this year, these are the guys you should be targeting: the high upside day two guys or the year two guys who didn't do much as rookies that could pan out. So I'd like to kind of look at it that way, but it is really tough to put these guys in a flat linear list. Let's move on to the next tier, though, where we have ranked these guys after we've talked about how difficult it is to rank these guys. Tier 5, we've got Kenneth Walker, RJ Harvey, James Cook, Caleb Johnson, Derrick Henry, Chuba Hubbard, and Alvin Kamara. And shocker here, Jeff, I'm a little bit higher on the veterans. You're a little bit higher on the young guys. Who specifically in this tier would you like to? Actually, I want to start this off. I want to talk about Ken Walker because he's a guy that I'm really still holding it down for. I've got him as RB13. You've got him as RB18. I can't help but be excited by two things. One, the Clint Kubiak offense, where they're probably going to run the ball a lot. And two, the murmurs that we're hearing about Ken Walker or Charbonnet getting traded out of Seattle, which would just, whether Ken Walker lands in a different spot or whether Zach Charbonnet lands in a different spot, we're looking at a much higher ceiling for both of these guys in the future. Talk to me a little bit about Ken Walker and why you're a little bit lower than I am. Probably, yeah, where consensus is smack dab in between the two of us.
Yeah, I think he's an interesting player because I think when you look at his production as a whole and you walk back through his college career, it was kind of quiet there for a little while when he was at Wake Forest, and then he just had a massive explosion year his last year at Michigan State, and he kind of carried that momentum over into his rookie year. And so much of what we've seen from his production is on the big splash runs. And I say young players, I want the guys that create splash plays, and Ken Walker is a young-ish guy that creates splash plays. My concern is we saw those splash plays kind of disappear a little bit last year, the year before, but last year especially, and moved more towards, it's talked about Bucky Irving, where you're getting more usage early in the season. Legs aren't quite as fresh. You're looking at just different windows into what the way the defense is playing you. And I think that Ken Walker is a player that I think has struggled to overcome some of those things and some of those changes. And my overarching concern is that sometimes you get players that where it's like everything's going just right, where he's like seeing the field just right in a great groove. And I feel like it happens a little bit more in baseball than we think about in football, just because
Yeah.
that's more statistically driven. And you can think about a guy that just went out of his mind for a month versus like over in general. But I think when you start to stack up Ken Walker's whole career, it feels like there was a little stretch there where he was just fantastic. And then the rest of the time, he's just been pretty good. And so that's where I would like to see him duplicate maybe that rookie year, maybe that Michigan State year, at least one more time, probably. Versus, I think if you're heading down this, 3.7 yards per carry. I know Dynasty people, yards per carry doesn't matter, but I think when you look at context and the way that that's happening, I think it does matter. And the way that that's happening is he's always been that type of player where, here's 2 yards, here's losing 2 yards, here's a broken 65-yard run. And Saquon Barkley is that player like to a
Say, and
premium T,
so is
but
Derrick Henry, and so is Devon Achane. I feel like there are a lot of productive running backs who have that style. Adrian Peterson was a guy who, he'd hit the line, and then rip off an 80-yarder.
yes. And Walker, I think, has that potential. I don't know if he's got that potential in the current iteration of the Seahawks offense.
Fair enough. Um, we have to talk about RJ Harvey because it wouldn't be a dynasty running back show if we didn't. You and I are very much so in agreement on RJ Harvey. I'm curious to see actually what I'm guessing it's a little bit higher than where we are. He is the RB19 on Keep Trade Cut. I have him as RB17. You have him as RB16. So shockingly, you and I are actually both higher than consensus on RJ Harvey, which I wouldn't have expected. But yeah, it's pretty easy to see the upside as the pass catcher in a Sean Payton offense. The one thing I want to say, and I think, Jeff, you'll probably agree with me on this, is I think some people have imagined that RJ Harvey is just going to be the workhorse, that he's going to come out the gate and just be the guy, second round pick, and they need a running back there. I think much like we talked about with Omari and Hampton, people should be open to the idea that Audric Estime and Jaleel McLaughlin and some of the other running backs are still going to be involved here. That doesn't mean RJ Harvey can't be very productive, especially if this is a high scoring offense with a lot of touchdown opportunities and he's catching a lot of passes, which we know is common in this Sean Payton offense. But I think people should probably be aware that Audric Estime is going to be a little bit more involved than they want.
Yeah, Audric Estime is going to be more involved than they want, and Jaleel McLaughlin is going to be more
Yeah.
involved than they want. And I know that they were bad last year. Estime being a rookie, being a very young rookie, kind of learning the ropes, and McLaughlin dealing with some injury concerns. But when you look at the three of them in total, they make a lot of sense as a Sean Payton backfield, and I think that I just go back to a lot of people will assign Alvin Kamara, and that's understandable. That's the most recent thing in our mind. But if you peel that way back to Darren Sproles, Pierre Thomas, and Mark Ingram,
Yep.
when they were kind of a three-headed approach there, I think that's kind of feels a little bit more natural. To me, it's really going to come down to, for RJ Harvey, maybe to hit his ceiling of where people are expecting, it's on two ends where he needs to have a little bit more of the goal line usage. And you could see a scenario where they decide that Audric Estime is our battering ram inside the 5. He's getting every touch because that's what we're going to do. And then the passing game usage, you want to see that. And you could also see a scenario where they say Jaleel McLaughlin is our passing specialist and he's going to get the passing downs. And then that leaves RJ Harvey maybe weaving a little bit in the middle where he is getting the bulk of the work, which you feel great about, but he's not getting the touchdowns and he's not getting the passing game work. And you're just like, well, we're just kind of stuck here.
Getting 16 carries for 54 scoreless yards is what nobody wants to see.
He scores like 5 or 6 touchdowns, but they're all like 10 plus yards. And you're just like,
So here, I'm a little bit surprised by this, Jeff, because you and I both have RJ Harvey ahead of Caleb Johnson, correct? Yes, we do. Keep Trade Cut, however, has Caleb Johnson ahead of RJ Harvey. I don't get that. You're looking at a round 2 guy who catches passes and makes big chunk plays compared to a round 3 guy behind one of the league's worst offensive lines who doesn't catch passes. Is it just the age? Is that why people would prefer Caleb Johnson to RJ Harvey, or do you think that people are just imagining that now we're going to get a Najee Harris workload with Devon Achan efficiency? I mean, I just don't really get the Caleb Johnson love right now, especially putting him ahead of Chase Brown, Christian McCaffrey, RJ Harvey, Derrick Henry, Chuba Hubbard. There's a lot of names that stand out to me in consensus rankings that I don't think Caleb Johnson should be ahead of.
Well, it's the Jalen Warren conundrum, where when
Yeah.
you've got Najee Harris with low efficiency and you're frustrated about that, Jalen Warren, the efficiency looks amazing, and he's this different explosive back, and we really want to see a lot more Jalen Warren. But then the moment that Najee Harris is gone and Caleb Johnson comes in, well, I mean, Jalen Warren is old and he's never really done much with his opportunity. And Caleb Johnson is like the young new hotness, and he's going to take it over and be the feature bell cow back. Is I feel that's the Jalen Warren conundrum that you're dealing with right now, and so that's part of it. I think that people maybe see, as much as it's not out in the consensus. There is maybe some internal acknowledgement that people don't want to give into a Sean Payton split committee backfield and have that vision there, versus looking at like a Le'Veon Bell with Mike Tomlin and how much did he dominate, and James Conner dominated work, and even Najee Harris when he first started dominated work. And so maybe you're looking at Caleb Johnson as the upside of a cleaner path to being just the 3-down back who has everything in that backfield. I think that's probably part of it as well. I mean, I know people are regularly taking Caleb Johnson top 10 in their rookie drafts right now, which, given the other talent on the board, feels a little bit aggressive to me. And I think we're just operating with a little bit more trepidation maybe than a lot of people are with Caleb Johnson.
So I don't think we need to talk about the veterans, Derrick Henry, Alvin Kamara. You know what you're getting with those guys. If they're great for another 3 years, congratulations. You struck gold acquiring these guys, but know that the end could be near for these guys as they reach age 30 and beyond. The last name I want to talk about in this year, though, Jeff, specifically, is Chuba Hubbard, because I feel like I'm eating the cheese here. Looking at your ranking and my ranking, I moved him all the way up to RB 18. I see a very clean path to pretty much the same workload we saw last year, where he was a fringe RB1 for a chunk of the season. Of course, they've got an out built into his contract after this year, which they can move on for just about $4.5 million in dead cap. So when you see that 4-year, $33 million contract headline, that is a little bit deceiving, but still, kind of like I said, with Christian McCaffrey and Derrick Henry and some of these other guys, even if I'm getting just one season of good production, that's enough for me to justify being a top 20 running back. And it seems like the stage is set for Chuba Hubbard to do that again in 2025.
So I'm going to push back on James Cook versus Chuba Hubbard. You have Chuba
Okay.
Hubbard ranked ahead of James Cook, and they are the exact same age. James Cook is in a better offense. I mean, certainly there's long-term questions about James Cook, but
That's it.
if both
That's
players
it
were
for me.
sitting on, but if both players, James Cook and Chuba Hubbard, are sitting in the free agent market right now, who do you think is getting a bigger contract, and who do you think a team is envisioning as being their centerpiece in free agency relative to who has kind of been labeled as a backup?
I don't think either of them, to be honest, are going to get premium money to be a lead back. I think either of these guys, wherever they go in their next step. So here with James Cook, I wrote about James Cook at length in my Dynasty running back article. If James Cook were to come out and get a contract extension, he would immediately shoot up into my top 12. But I think that he is so much of a product of that Bills offense that I think if you drop him on 20 other NFL teams, he is just kind of a back end RB2, but he just gets so much volume. The threat of Josh Allen being there opens up these huge rushing lanes where he can rip off big chunk plays. I don't know if I could see James Cook having that same productivity in a different offense. And that's my fear, is that he's asking for a lot of money right now. If the Bills choose to move on and he doesn't land in another smash spot, that we could be looking at the value just falling out from underneath him.
Yeah, and I think James Cook's a little bit better than that. I guess is where we differentiate there. And I look at the Panthers adding Rico Dowdle, adding Trevor Etienne, Jonathan Brooks. We're
Hopefully 2026.
pulling for him,
Yeah.
and brings it in 2026, but we don't know where that's question is sitting there. I think Cook would be valued a lot more on an open market than Chuba Hubbard would be, and I think that Cook is. Obviously, I'm sitting here with the Bills banner behind me, but I think that Cook is viewed more as a less maybe a product of the system, and when you look at across the league, and more as a high end running back.
Fair. We'll see if they choose to bring him back or if he hits the free agent market. I just see so many times. I feel like those big plays you see from James Cook are him just untouched, 40 yards into the end zone because there is just a rushing lane the size of a garage door that he's able to go through. You see these kind of gimmicky, schemed up touches where they're putting him in motion, hiding him behind the offensive line, and then popping him out in space and getting the ball to him. I do see a lot of that. Maybe he's just got phenomenal vision and is a great route runner that gets open like that. But we will see in the coming years here. Let's move on to tier 6. And this is where things get pretty gross pretty quickly. We've talked about a lot of guys that we want to acquire, have some differentiation here, but the differentiation we have in these later tiers gets really, really wide. So let's talk a little bit about tier 6. Travis Etienne, David Montgomery, Cam Scadaboo, Tank Bigsby, Tyrone Tracy, Zach Charbonnet, Tony Pollard, Joe Mixon, Trey Benson, and Najee Harris. So you've got some rookies here. You've got some old guys. You've got some productive veterans. You've got some year 2 guys that we're hoping can take that step forward. And this is one where you and I agree up to 25 spots on some of these rankings. The only guy we're really in agreement on this tier is Tony Pollard, who we both have at RB29. But is there anyone specifically from this tier that you'd like to talk about, Jeff?
Well, overall, our two biggest, well, once we get deeper, but our two biggest discrepancies early in the board, Trey Benson, we have a 25 spot discrepancy, and then Tank Bigsby is our other probably biggest discrepancy. We've got a 12 spot difference there. And I'm much, much higher on Trey Benson and Tank Bigsby. I view them as young running backs who have shown glimpses and have potential. And I think Bigsby obviously can be pretty crowded there with Bashal Tutin supposed to be the next Devon Achane and Bucky Irving rolled into one player, and then Travis Etienne still being there. But I think Bigsby was very, very good last year, and he's 23 years old, going to be 24 years old, and so he's still kind of in an early career window, hasn't had a lot of mileage put on him yet. And then Trey Benson is very young, and he is in a very clean situation that if anything were to happen to James Conner, Trey Benson is wheels up, top 12 running back potential type player. And I'm going to put higher value on that just because Connor's at a stage in his career where one, things could happen to James Conner, but two, with him, Trey Benson being a second round pick, or the third round pick,
Yeah.
day 2, earliest pick in
I think
the
he was
year
a second
before
round pick.
draft.
I'm
I
looking it
think
up right
it
now,
was
but I'm
too, but
pretty sure he was a second round pick.
these are things that I should know before I
Third
start
round.
talking. But
Third round
okay,
pick. Day 2
yes,
pick.
but yes,
Sounds better
but
to say
I
day
think
2.
it's. I think the consensus push against Trey Benson's gone way too far, and I think he sits as, I mean, would it be shocking to see him outplay James Conner from like early in the season? I don't think so at all.
I might be a little bit shocked to see him outplay him, but I think I probably am a little bit too low on him. And it's weird. I thought I liked Trey Benson. I'm a little bit lower on him than I think I realized I was. And I talked about it last year that we saw really a tale of 2 seasons from Trey Benson, who came out early in the year and looked terrible, looked indecisive, and he had these happy feet behind the line of scrimmage, and he was running into his own blockers and couldn't break a tackle to save his life. And then they shelved him for a handful of weeks where he was getting no work, very, very limited role. And when he came back out later in the season, he did look much more like the player he was in college. He was running through defenders. He was much more decisive, hitting the hole. And we saw the efficiency skyrocket. We saw the yards per carry skyrocket over the second half of the season. So I think there is faith for Trey Benson, and I'm going to move him up in my rankings after having this conversation. Bigsby is the one that scares me a little bit. I think when you look at him next to Travis Etienne, he looked like a better running back. But if you look at his whole body of work, the efficiency profile really wasn't great. I mean, he was 124th in rushing EPA last year. There were some nice plays that we saw here and there, but I mean, the only thing that he has inside the top 30, the only efficiency metric is his juke rate, which has almost no stickiness to year-over-year correlation. So, Bigsby's one that stands out to me a little bit. Something else from this tier that I want to discuss, though, is Cam Scadaboo and Tyrone Tracy. We have almost an exact flip flop here. I have Cam Scadaboo as my RB31. You have Tyrone Tracy as your RB33. I have Cam Scadaboo as my RB22. Or I'm sorry, you have Cam Scadaboo as your RB22. I have Tyrone Tracy as my RB21. So we have almost just taken a stance on this Giants backfield that is completely inverse of one another. I prefer Tyrone Tracy. You prefer Cam Scadaboo. You go up first. What is it about Scadaboo that you like?
Well, first off, we talked previously in the show about day three running backs and what are you supposed to do with day three running backs, Dave?
Trade him for a first, but you're not getting a first round pick in return for Tyrone Tracy.
Yeah, but I think I look at Scatabo as they make that pick
Scadaboo
and they
also a day
say
three back.
he was, but
First pick a day three, I believe, but technically a day three back.
yeah, well, Chimeri DK is the first pick of day three,
That's
but
right. That's right.
he
Yeah.
doesn't exist. So Scatabo comes in very very high, fourth round pick, day three pick. I think the Giants looked at it as we need this element within our offense. He's going to be a volume play, and so I think Tracy succeeded or sustained on volume last year, or especially windows where either Devin Singletary wasn't available or ineffective, and the Giants are kind of playing out the string. Whereas Scatabo is born to be like a volume type of a running back, and I think so. A lot gets made about Tyrone Tracy's receiver background.
Mhm.
I don't
Didn't see
know
much of
that.
it last year.
Yeah, and I don't know that Scatabo is not a worse, or might be even be a better receiving running back than Tyrone Tracy. And so that's, I think, overall they viewed it last year as kind of a lost year. Tyrone Tracy, let's see what he's got. And then they said they valued Scatabo pretty high because yes, he went in day three, but when you look at when he went overall, he was still like running back 6 or 7 off the board. And they kind of looked at it and said we need this in our offense. This guy, and I think that when you put the pads on, put them in camp together, I just expect that Scatabo is going to look better than Tyrone Tracy.
Yeah, we will see. My fear with Scatabo, of course, is that just the poor athletic testing is going to be a detriment to his ability to get on the field. And I know, not even talking about the 40 time, but every one of his athletic measure or every one of his why am I drawing a blank? Just his workouts weren't great. I don't know if his relative athletic score off the top of my head, but came in a little bit slower than we had expected, and that was after he skipped the combine, so he can slim down and hopefully speed up for his pro day. So I do have some concerns there that he was just kind of a man among boys in college, and that doesn't always translate to the NFL. But this will be a backfield that we will be taking very close note of in season, kind of seeing what the usage looks like, what the trends are early in the season, and hopefully get a better picture there. Jeff, the last tier that I want to talk about here, weirdly enough, we don't have a ton of disparities here. We're actually pretty close in our rankings, but tier 7, this will bring us through RB 39 in our dynasty rankings. DeAndre Swift, Aaron Jones, James Conner, Bashaw Tutin, Isaiah Pacheco, Ray Davis, and Tajay Spears. No, let's throw Brian Robinson in there just to make it a nice clean 40. Neither of us have him inside our top 40, but the average ranking does squeak him in there. So anybody in this tier specifically that you'd like to talk about? Maybe some of the veterans, maybe some of the young guys. Anybody jump out that piques your interest?
Isaiah Pacheco is probably top of mind just because I think that there's been too much of a fade on him. We saw him come back last year. I don't think he should have played probably, but
No.
and I think had the Chiefs been not trying to win the Super Bowl, he probably would not have played. And so the last thing that we see is what gets stuck in our mind. Whereas coming into the year last year, he kind of seemed like he was the sole running back there, consensus top 10-ish type player, and was wheels up for Isaiah Pacheco. And so I think he's great value right now if you can grab him, because it does seem to be a little bit of a knee jerk, a little bit of outside of mind, a little bit of he just looked so bad when he returned that, and then they didn't really do much to address the position. I know they added
Right.
Brashard Smith, and we love the history of Chiefs 7th round running backs primarily because of Isaiah Pacheco. And so I think it's that them had they had bigger concerns, and I do think they're an organization that doesn't value the position, but I think there were avenues that they could have attacked maybe in free agency or gone other ways instead of just running back Kareem Hunt and bringing a 7th round pick Brashard Smith in. So I think Pacheco
Elijah
has
Mitchell as
great.
well. I mean, not a
Yeah,
name we
yeah, I
remember,
guess.
but yeah, I mean, we'll see if he even makes a 53-man roster. But I'd be remiss not to mention his name.
Yeah, and then Tajay Spears is an interesting one to me because we saw him really explode over the fantasy playoffs last year. Really get that opportunity with Tony Pollard having some having injury, other things.
Yep.
That seems like a player to me that you want to buy. Now he's a third year running back, but you want to buy discounted players like that where I think there is a very, very clear path to Cam Ward improving that offense. If Tony Pollard misses time, Tajay Spears being a top 12 running back in fantasy without Tony Pollard there. It's just because we've seen it in limited windows. And the pass catching, he's an elite pass catching
Yeah.
back. There's just a lot in his profile that I think splashes towards becoming a high end player.
Like you said, he's going into year 3. Just gonna quiz you real quickly. Do you know how old Tajay Spears is, Jeff?
He's 23.
Yeah, still just 23 years old. You got to
Yeah.
remember, he was one of those guys that was drafted really, really young. So, another one of those names who's been around for a couple of years. And I think people, once a running back hits day 3 or year 3 and hasn't had that huge breakout yet, they're willing to just kind of throw in the towel. But this was a guy who slid only because of medical concerns, was drafted very, very young, and has stayed healthy now throughout his NFL career. So, definitely something to take note of. Tajay Spears has been a huge, huge buy for me. I think in almost every startup and draft that I've done so far, I end up walking out with Tajay Spears. Brian Robinson is another one to talk about, Jeff, and I want to bring this up because Alfredo Brown and we did a running back rankings show talking about dynasty rankings last week, and Brian Robinson was the guy that we had the biggest disparity on. You and I both have him outside of the top 40. Alfredo Brown was a little bit warmer on him. And when you look at the Washington backfield, you'd assume that he is going to take the majority of the touches, but I just see a guy with such limited pass catching upside, doesn't have a lot of juice. And now with Jaden Daniels there taking a lot of the high value touches near the goal line, I get really, really concerned about Brian Robinson. I don't want to say he's off my radar in Dynasty, but considering what his acquisition cost is right now, he is the consensus RB26, where I've got him at RB42, means that I have almost no Brian Robinson. And this was a guy that I liked coming into the league, but I think that his value has just been pushed up way too high.
Yeah, and a name to file away here is Ja'Cory Krosky Merritt. He was a 7th-round pick, but Brian Robinson's going to be a free agent after this year. Austin Eckler is going to be a free agent after this year. The only player that the Commanders are going to have under contract would be Ja'Cory Krosky Merritt. And I don't know that he's going to break out. He's an interesting player because he sat out his last year of college, did not get invited to the combine, but then he was the MVP of the Shrine Bowl. And I think there's a lot to like about him. But at the same time, being a 7th-round pick, being a lot of risk in there. But I think that I mention him because you get these windows where people do realize that there's nobody under contract for the Commanders except for Ja'Cory Krosky Merritt, and they pop dynasty value. And I think that there's potential there. Brian Robinson, to talk about him, I think what you see is what you get probably at this point. And it's kind of one of those that if you're thinking about like a 0 RB build and you just need to plug Brian Robinson in just to kind of get past week to week, that's fine. But I mean, the goal line stuff, like didn't really pop the way that you would think it would in a Commanders offense that did score a lot of points. And just in general, you're just not getting big spike weeks out of Brian Robinson. You're just kind of getting that safe, to use the Goff analogy. It's like taking a 3-wood and putting the ball in the fairway.
Exactly. Yeah. Last guy I want to talk about before we end the show, Jeff, is DeAndre Swift, just because we're at that point in the season now where we're still talking dynasty, but starting to turn the page to redraft rankings. And DeAndre Swift is a guy that you and I are pretty much at consensus with his value. You know, a lot of people have him in that RB30 to RB35 range. But man, with the Bears backfield as is, when I was doing my redraft rankings, DeAndre Swift slotted in for me as RB17. And if that's what you're getting is, a year where Roshan Johnson and Kyle Monangai are the only hurdles to a huge workload, I think that we're probably too low on DeAndre Swift going into 2025. Of course, there's still the looming J.K. Dobbins or Nick Chubb, or maybe they bring in somebody else. But as it stands right now, this is where DeAndre Swift is getting valued, and he's going to be the RB1 on this Bears offense. I think there could be a nice value there for teams to go out and acquire DeAndre Swift and get some immediate production.
Yeah, and I'm taking a really measured approach on DeAndre Swift because you talk about J.K. Dobbins, you talk about Nick Chubb. I think 2 names, Ken Walker and Travis Etienne, are 2 names maybe to monitor. There's already been trade rumors with Ken Walker. I mean, Breece Hall is another name you throw in there. To me, it feels like one of these things that we get into August and through the first week of camp, and then all of a sudden you get the breaking news: the Jaguars have traded Travis Etienne to the Bears for a 3rd-round pick, and they get back a 4th-round pick, like type of a thing. And like,
you gotta love those.
I feel like
those training camp running back trades. I remember it was like wheels up for Damian Williams a few years ago, and then like 6 days before the kickoff, it's like, and the Chiefs brought in LaShawn McCoy, and then it was just a headache that entire season. You never knew who to start in that backfield.
Well, and it's, I think when you're sitting in an office right now and you're thinking about building your roster and you're kind of like, well, I mean, Swift is okay enough. But then like you get into camp and he's not being in the position that you want your running back to be in, or like you're kind of like, well, if this is what we got, or if this is what we got and he goes down, okay, maybe we should have this conversation about going and seeing what's in the market. Whereas, I mean, well, if Tootin stopped fumbling the ball for the Jaguars, but if the Jaguars get into camp and say, well, we like Tink Bigsby and we like Tootin and we
Right.
feel pretty good about those two backs, and Travis Etienne's on his last year of the deal, now might be the time that we can get some value for him. You deadlines drive action, seeing actual football on the field drives action sometimes. And so that's where the running back market, I think, pops a little bit.
There you go, Bears fans. Don't worry. If DeAndre Swift doesn't work out, they can make a trade for Travis Etienne, because what's better than one DeAndre Swift? Two DeAndre Swift. So maybe that'll happen. But I want to thank everybody for tuning in. This is our running back dynasty rankings and tiers episode. Tune in Thursday when Jeff and I are going to be coming out with our dynasty running back wide receiver episode. Same exact format. We're going to go through our top 30, 40, 50, whatever we have time for, break them up into tiers, talking about all of them. I want to thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you on Thursday.
So what? Wait, Dave.
I did forget to plug the league.
If you're still listening, we
If you're
have.
still, yes.
I hope you're still listening, and I appreciate you greatly that you are still listening. And
I was going to save this
got,
for the Thursday show and try to plug it earlier in the show. But yes, please, Jeff.
Yes, we have multiple Dynasty listener leagues that we did the startups last year, and there are 2 leagues right now. They both have 3 spots open right now, and we need to get these leagues filled. We have not done the rookie draft yet, and so we want to get you, our loyal listeners, into these leagues because there are 3 spots in each. We'll do dispersal drafts for both leagues, and so you'll get an opportunity to all 3 of those players will be thrown off the rosters into this dispersal market. You'll get to draft out of that market of the team that you want. So it's not just that you're taking over an orphan. You are getting to do a draft in that. We have not done the rookie draft yet, so you'll get to do the rookie draft. But either leave us a review on the podcast. That would be a great way. Leave us a comment on YouTube that you are interested in doing these listener leagues, and just kind of in general, figure out a way to get in contact with us. There's many ways to get in contact with us, and do one of those things, and we'll get you into these listener leagues.
Yeah, the best way, what we'll do, we'll guarantee you a spot in a listener league. If you find this show on Apple Podcasts, just search Football Guys Dynasty Football Show. You'll find this show. Just leave a review and email a screenshot of that review to kluge@footballguys.com, and we will guarantee you a spot in a listener league. If it's not one of these dispersal leagues, if we run out of those spots, we will start up a new league just for you guys. So kluge@footballguys.com, go to Apple Podcasts, leave a review, send that to me, and we will get you in a league. And on that note, thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you on Thursday.